Albert loves to write about robots because they're very efficient. Officer Ryan is a jerk in any reality. And Benny Russell has a dream. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
Today, we're doing a review of Deep Space Nine's Season 6, Episode 13, Far Beyond the Stars, legendary episode with legendary writer Ira Steven Behr and showrunner, producer. Cool guy. My name is Ryan T. Husk. We are also joined by Malissa Longo. It is a Nog episode with a very cool and iconic scene in there to talk about as well.
Hello. Yay. Yay.
All right, so this was a story by Mark Scott Zicree, written by, of course, Ira Steven Behr and Hans Beimler, directed by, lots to talk about here, Mr. Avery Brooks. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Right.
Doing good.
Yeah.
Doing really good. This is a wonderful episode.
Oh.
Clearly one of the classics. And before we get started, Ira, I want to say that, number one, as I'm watching this show, I have an increasing, even though I was already at a high level, it increases as I watch the show, just an admiration and respect for the work that you've done on Deep Space Nine. The way you maestroed this whole situation and put these stories out there for us to enjoy. So my hat's off to you. It just gets better and better as the seasons go on. And this is an example of just the level of greatness that you achieved on television. So thank you, Ira, for giving us these stories and telling these stories and putting them in these kinds of ways and format.
Thanks, Rock. Appreciate it.
It's amazing. There's so many places to go with this. Ryan, I don't know where you want to start.
Well, I'll tell you where I want to start. First of all, I'm going to default to you and Ira, of course, and Malissa as well, because I've seen this a few times, but I hadn't seen it in easily 10 or 15 years. So where I want to start is kind of where you want to start, Cirroc, which is, had you ever seen this episode before? I know you hadn't seen most of these episodes, but you were in it, but had you seen it? Did you know how powerful it was? Did you know how good it was? And then that's what I want to know first off.
Well, a few years ago at a convention in Vegas, Creation, we did a rewatch of Far Beyond the Stars.
Right, yeah.
And we had a panel assembled on stage for kind of reviewing this episode. And that was the first time I had seen it in maybe 10, 15 years, like you're saying, Ryan. So it was a great experience because I actually got to see it backstage with, majority of the cast that were in it. Ira, you were in part of that panel. Mark Zicree was part of that panel. And I think the moment that I remember the most was just before we got on stage, the climax scene with Benny Russell in the news office, saying that it's real, he created it. And there was a stillness across the room as we were all watching this together. And it kind of brought everybody to a silence and made everybody take note and pay attention. And that was one thing that I noticed, that normally backstage everybody's shuffling around and shooting the shit a little bit and just kind of moving around backstage, but everybody was still and fixated on the television screen as this episode was playing. So it had that kind of effect on all of us, and it was a special thing to actually witness it with everybody else and see it with everyone else. Ira, you remember that panel?
Yeah. I had not seen the show since it had aired. So, and I was a little bit hesitant. I'd seen, I forget which one, but I recall maybe it was at the motion picture museum, whatever it is in Beverly Hills, where they have those salutes when they did the Deep Space Nine salute. They showed something on the big screen and I thought the episode, whichever one it was, worked really well. But I was a little bit hesitant about sitting in the audience and watching it, because I thought, how is it going to play? The sound is going to be bad, which it was.
Right.
And, you know, the picture blown up that big wasn't graded. It did not look great. It really did not look that wonderful. But the fact is, it held the audience. I mean, it's a convention audience, but it was, I have to say, and, you know, I had some family there for the first time at a convention, besides Laura, and it was a pretty good experience, I have to say. It worked, worked well, you know. Lord knows, if you had told me in 1999 that Far Beyond the Stars and Past Tense were going to be the episodes that in some ways, you know, mean a great deal to me in terms of the whole experience, I would have said no. You know, I wasn't a big fan of Message episodes at the time. I felt it was preaching to the converted. I thought it was easy, you know, an easy win, an easy pat on the back, and changed over the years because this country refuses to change, and the same goddamn lessons have to be taught again and again, and you have to reach people slowly, it seems, a few at a time. So the validity of the episodes still remain, unfortunately. So yes, I look back at Far Beyond the Stars with quite a bit of affection.
Well, Ira, you write magic, man. When we are rewatching this now, I don't know if it has the same hit as it did, you know, 20 something years ago. I feel like it kind of hits even more nowadays. I think people grow to appreciate Deep Space Nine and Star Trek more, and Far Beyond the Stars, and you yourself more and more as time goes on. But honestly, you know, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks this, but you write freaking magic and you captivate people. And not just that, but in this episode, you were talking about how, you blow it up on some 40-foot screen, hardly anything's going to look good that's made for television. But the performances, and we can get a bit more into that a little later, but I think a lot of the reason why everybody was so captivated when Benny Russell is breaking down is because that performance is so intense and so real. But
well, yeah, I mean, that was at the time, I mean, before the show was even cut together, that day on the set became kind of legendary, and everyone who was there was most affected by it. So yes. And I don't know about magic, but I do know that it used to bug me that when people, and then I'll get off this what bugged me topic, but it used to bug me during the run of the show that I'd meet people and they'd say, oh yeah, Deep Space Nine, my favorite episode was Trials and Tribulations. And it was like, that sucks, man. That's like, that's not a Deep Space Nine episode. None of us even wanted to do that episode. We didn't even want to do the tribute to the 30 years. You know, it's like anyone who told me that, I used to think, not a Deep Space Nine fan, not really. Star Trek fan, definitely, but not really a Deep Space Nine fan. Because if that's their favorite episode, they are not on the bus. They are not watching the show. They are not digging the show, you know? And to, like I said, to a lesser extent, I felt the Message shows, but now I look back, Duet, you know, which was a Message show in its own way, you know, Past Tense, they're good stuff. But yeah, Avery's performance quickly went into the stuff of legend within the show itself.
Yeah, I agree. just really quickly, also, I want to mention that Aaron Eisenberg and I were on that panel together, and Malissa, you were there, this Far Beyond the Stars panel. And one of the moments that I remember is us cracking up on stage. Somebody said something that was
remember that.
I remember that very well too.
the two of us. He kept nudging me and looking at me like, "Did you hear what he just said?" And we just kept laughing about 10 minutes in that segment. So shout out
What
to.
was it about? Can you
that
tell
moment.
us?
I think Mark Zicree kind of used language that could be used in another
Yes.
way. One of those kind of double entendre phrases where you're saying, "Did he just say?" It was hard, whatever it was, but it was one of those joking moments. And you'll see it if you watch back on and watch that interview. You'll be able to catch the phrase that kind of set us off. But this episode, Hans doesn't get enough credit for this episode. I'd like to also give you an opportunity to just to talk about, kind of his involvement in the role that he played in this story.
Well, as you know, Hans is not in the best of health at the moment. I'm gonna see him again in a couple of weeks. So everyone should be sending good thoughts Hans's way. It was, I had spent a lot of time working with Wolfie,
Mhm.
and when Wolfie decided to take a hike at the end of season 5, there was just so much going on with 26 episodes a season. I just, I knew Hans and I had done like three shows already together, 3 series together. So, I pulled him in, and, it wasn't quite the, Wolfie and I could bang out a script in like 4 or 5 days. And that's with only writing half a day, the other half being in the room breaking stories. It was pretty, I look back on it, it's like, how the hell did we ever do what we did? But, that was then. With Hans, it took maybe a day or 2 longer, but you just go into that rhythm. And it was the same thing. He'd be at the typewriter, I'd be sitting next to him, and we just wail. And if it sounded good to the both of us, then it stayed in. If one of us had a problem with it, then we kept at it until we both could agree on it. So it was I'm glad you brought it up, because Hans is one of those, Nog makes an appearance. My wife, this is some kind of thing that he does, because he does it on all the Zooms, the show I'm on, he's doing it every day. He has to show up because he knows my attention is on someone else and he doesn't like it. So he needs to go, yes, but you love me. You don't love the people.
That's perfect.
That's exactly it.
There I am. Yeah.
And he's
Yeah.
cute as hell too, by the way.
Cute.
He's a good guy. So yeah, it was just easy and it was fun. And given the stresses and strains, when I look at these shows, all I keep thinking is I never was down on the set. It was so rare to get time to go on the set. And so much of that, it's so important. We had no real writing producers down on the set. We were too busy. And I think the show could have used a producer on the set, a writer, at times in different episodes to just tweak things or just make sure that the director was getting what we really wanted them to get. So the only fun, was the writer's room, because everyone was together and it was, a blast, and we would like the overmind, and, being locked in a room with someone who I liked, and so writing didn't become a chore. With Hans, it was never a chore, or rarely a chore.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of good work together in those 2 seasons. I mean, he was his way. You know, the whole Vic Fontaine thing. He was I didn't have to pull his ass along in that. He was on board with that from the very beginning. He loved it too, which is what we needed to get that kind of stuff done. But you know, he he grew up in Mexico. You know, I mean, as a kid,
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
That's how he started out in life. And you know, I'm not sure whether Spanish was his first language or just his equal language along with English. So he knows a little bit about culture and race and racism. You know, I mean, he's of Jewish background and he grew up in Mexico. He's got a lot, he knows a lot about discrimination, you know. So Hans. I'll tell him we talked about him. So,
Yeah, please give him our love and our thoughts and prayers are going out to him. He's a very humble guy who's not into any kind of limelight and spotlight, and he deserves his dues for the work that he did. But I do want to say some of the things that you guys talk about in this episode. You bring up a lot of writers, H.G. Wells, Bradbury, Sturgeon, Herbert Ross.
Right.
These people that you're bringing up, are these people that you read and influenced by, and is that how they made it into this show?
To an extent. I mean, I read. Look, I like a lot of Bradbury for sure. I was never into space opera. You know, my science fiction was, Philip K. Dick, who my sister turned me on, who no one knew. You know, it's so funny. Back in the day when Philip K. Dick died, he had like a 2-line obituary in the paper. I don't think he even made it into the New York Times. He had like a 3-line obit in the LA Times. You know, it's so amazing to think back how unknown he was. And I love Philip K. Dick. I love J.G. Ballard, which is a different type of science fiction. But I was never into the Asimovs or the Sturgeons as much, but I know how important they were. And when Zachary pitched, this idea, which this is what if we have a second, this is what I want to talk to Cirroc with. So when you hear this, Cirroc, and I know you did, that he pitched it as a Jake story. It was supposed to be a Jake episode, and it was supposed to be about aliens. It had nothing to do with. It was set in the 50s, had nothing to do with racism, had nothing to do with any of the stuff that it became. It was just Jake being a writer in the 50s, and it turns out that aliens are watching and blah blah blah. And I turned that show down. I said, nope, that's not the Jake show. I want to do. Because I didn't see any bottom to it. I didn't know what it was going to be about, except Star Trek episode about aliens trying to figure out humanity, and I saved that shit for the other shows,
Right.
Other versions of Trek. But do you ever think about that? Do you ever think some version of Far Beyond the Stars, it would have been totally different? Do you ever think that could have been mine?
The Jake show.
Could have been Jake.
That's interesting because we had another writer on who pitched an idea that ended up becoming a show that also said he wrote it as a Jake episode, and
Which
it was
one?
transformed. Ryan, do you remember the episode?
Let me look back. Was it Ethan Kalk? Let's see. How long ago was this?
It was maybe a couple of months ago. Literally,
maybe it was Michael Taylor with Resurrection.
It might have been. Yeah, I can't remember. But either way, I'm glad how it turned out. And ultimately, it could have went this way, could have went that way, could have been a Jake episode. certainly, but I think it has more impact that it is Sisko's perspective. He's the star of the show. He's the captain. It's envisioning a captain in the future. I think it makes more sense for him to be the focal point of it. And as I rewatch it, I still feel like Jake is a central character in this episode. So what happens to Jake is essentially what the show is about. So I still feel like I'm the centerpiece of the episode. And I am satisfied with the performance that I gave as this Jimmy character.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with it. I don't say, I wish I could have done more, done this. No, I don't look at it that way. I don't look at it with regret. I look at it like it came out the way it was supposed to come out. Avery did a fantastic job directing it. I love the shots where the blending between, Sisko and the past, kind of back and forth.
Really
with the clothing. Yeah, with the clothing from one era into another. I think the shot of Sisko kind of showing up in the middle of the street and getting hit by that taxi, seeing him in uniform in 1953, it was the perfect contrast to kind of set the tone for this crazy episode that we're about to see. So those director choices I thought were excellent. I don't know if they're also in the script or if you guys talked about these in production meetings. But
did we talk to you? Did we? Because I know Rick. Rick, one of those things that he had, which was, I'm not knocking it, but, it was like, well, Renee is going to have to play this guy who could be perceived as a racist. So we have to talk to Renee and make sure that Renee won't feel hurt that we're making him. So we actually had to have him talking.
But you guys are like, he's our guy.
It's a great part. What do you think? I mean, it's fine. Yeah. Did we talk to you? Do we have to talk to you about playing Jimmy and any kind of negative thing about that? I don't recall.
I don't remember a conversation about it. The conversations I remember were with Avery about, just giving me background on the character, street guy kind of person that I, know. So he was making me more familiar with that kind of aspect of it. But no, once I put that wig on and I had that toothpick and, I felt like I felt like I selling watches. I was ready to do whatever. I felt like a hustler and I liked it because it just literally, and that was another thing I loved about the show is some of the accents and voices that the characters changed and altered. We saw Aaron Eisenberg take his Nog voice and turn it into a New York, paperboy guy. We saw Dax kind of being this kind of, ditzy kind of.
But not as ditzy as the first thing she's going to be. She actually is not as, she's not.
Well, yeah.
She's got insight. It's just the persona makes you think.
It's the persona, right. And just the overall, like everybody kind of altered their conversational speech. Even O'Brien, he kind of turned into this stuttering guy that, and it was just so natural. And were those notes that you gave, or because I don't remember getting notes. I felt like I just changed it because that's what the character sounded like to me.
All I know, and this is a whole topic that could last hours, is, working with Avery on this show was a wonderful experience. I have to say, it wasn't always wonderful working with Avery at times. He could be very difficult, as everyone knows, but we always got along. And, I remember when he was directing other episodes and I'd go down to the set and have to tell him that something needed to be reshot. That was something we should have had the cameras on us because, wow. The first time Rick said, I'm not going down, you're going to have to do it. You go down and tell Avery, which I did, which was an interesting experience. But it began a relationship because when Avery was directing, he was fully engaged in a different way than when he was just acting. I mean, he called me every night. It became a joke with my wife because he would call up and go, hi, this is Avery. She goes, I know it's you, Avery. This is Laura. I'm not his assistant. You can just talk to me like we're both, is Ira home? Is Ira Behr home? Like, okay, Avery. And we talk, we'd have these great discussions about the next day's work. And even before that, during pre-production, I mean, he was so obviously into it, the famous killer line that he gave me at the end of the whole thing when we saw the finished product. And I said, Avery, we did it. And his line was, should have been a two-parter. It's like, God damn it, can't you just say it's good? I'm proud of it. Yes, it could have been a two-parter, but you know what that would have entailed? We would have had to think of that right away, and just getting that show approved and through everything wasn't easy. So, whatever. But the show itself, as an experience, I thought was great. And I remember hanging out at night on the New York street because I wanted to be there. I wanted to watch Avery direct. I wanted to see the whole kind of energy that was there. This was an expensive show. People talk about trials and tribulations and
Right.
this was a very expensive show for us. The extras, the costume, all the things that people who watch it aren't necessarily thinking, like space battles and special effects and stuff. It was an expensive show. It was a lot of work. I think it was an 8-day show. I don't think it was a 7-day.
Wow.
But I look back, 8 days. 8 days, man. That should have been a 9-10-day show. If 2 more days in that episode, and things would have even flowed better in some moments. But it doesn't matter. I'm just saying that show could have used more time. 8 days is like basic.
It's a blink. Yeah. It's a blink in an eye.
We've got to jump to a break real quick, everybody. But I know I've got about 50 more questions, so it's gonna be a 5-hour, 15-part introspective today. I know Melissa's got a ton of questions and Cirroc too. We'll get to as many as we can, and we're gonna have a great time. I'm gonna take a super quick break, and we'll be right back on the 7th Rule. Hey everybody, welcome back to the 7th Rule with Cirroc, Lofton, Ira Stephen Behr, Melissa Longo, and myself. Let's just get right back into it. We'll throw the trivioids at you real quick. The USS Cortez has been destroyed and there are no survivors. Captain Sisko introduced Captain Swafford to his wife. Patrolling Cardassian borders is getting more and more dangerous. You never know when you're going to run into a squadron of Jem'Hadar ships. Captain Sisko is considering stepping down. White Rose Ready Tea. What an appalling concept. Looks like it auto-corrected to appealing, but I remember it being appalling. HG would have liked it. Armin quits over stale donuts, or Armin's character. Officer Ryan, by the way, I'm a little sad that when I looked him up and it turned out his name was Officer Ryan, played by Mark Alima. I'm like, why has it got to be Ryan? Cassidy's character tries to convince Ben to buy a restaurant. The Giants are in 5th place, also sad. Albert loves to write about robots because they're very efficient. Willie hit a homer 400 feet, and Benny Russell has a dream. There are like a million trivioids, but let's just get right back into this real quick. Just before we change the subject, Ira, we've heard you mention before that Avery said it could have been a 2-parter or should have been a 2-parter. So as I'm watching this, I was thinking about that. And I was wondering if there was enough in the writer's room when you were putting this together, if there was enough to be a 2-parter, and if there were some scenes and some elements and some characters that you had to cut out in order to fit it into one episode, or was it just always a 1-parter and there was no problem there?
I was just so amazed we were getting to do this kind of meta episode. It just wasn't standard issue stuff at that time. So the idea of Benny Russell dreaming about the show and the fact the characters talking about themselves as fictional characters, I mean, again, so much of my time and my focus was just fighting for the opportunity. And when I say fighting, some of them were, small skirmishes. I'm not saying everything was a huge battle. There were huge battles, but even the skirmishes, when you're doing 26 episodes a season, are relentless. So I never, until Avery said two-parter, I was so busy being happy that we got this done and that it was good. That it was good because for Avery to direct it and be in so many scenes, as an actor, is not, usually you give an actor an episode where they're not going to be in it much so they could focus. But he was really involved in a magic. You want to talk about magic, Ryan T. Husk? That was magic watching Avery, and I hope he looks back on it with happiness, joy, pride, something positive. I hope he can feel that, because I think, it's if you're going to spend your time toiling in the creative arts, in a mass culture type way, it's not for intellectuals only, it's for, it's got to be consumed by a mass culture, and there's commercials in the middle of it, a lot of them. I hope he feels that it accomplished something. And not just this episode, obviously, but personally, I would hope he was proud of this episode.
Well, and I have a question too, because this episode had a lot of musical cadence to it, like in its storytelling and the way it was presented, from when we see Odo or Renee walk past Sisko's office in the 50s suit. It's like the initial notes of a song that's about to start. And I'm wondering if that was in the script, that musicality, or was it Avery, or was it a combination of both? Because it was such there was a special kind of rhythm to this episode that was.
I think a lot of that had to do with the editing. I do know that Avery was there at the music spotting, which most directors were not. I mean, Avery, soup to nuts, had his hands in everything, as well he should. I wish all directors did that. So a lot of it has to do with the editing, with the music. I mean, I'd have to go back, to be honest, Malissa, and look at the script again. I know it was all, the fact that he sees, Odo or what's his name in the character he plays. I forget his name. The what is?
The publisher.
Editor.
The editor, yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is. So he sees Willie, the ball player. All that was in the script. I'm pretty damn sure. But Avery, fine-tuned everything and made it all nice.
Douglas Paps. That was Odo.
Yeah,
that was Renee.
That was one of the questions I had for you, was where did you get the names for the alter ego characters?
Can we just say we could guess where Willie came from? because that was in the 50s. I'm figuring if it was like 55-ish, Willie, I think, was born in 31. So he'd be 24 years old. He wore number 24. I think Dorn was maybe 6 inches taller, but that's the only one we could guess.
Yeah. Nana's character, of course, I can't, it's like DC Fontana, they always did.
Hunter.
They were also,
right.
I forget, CL something. God, I can't remember, but there was a science fiction writer in the 50s.
Lewis?
Lucille.
No, not Lewis. CK something. Whatever. But that came from that. You know, the only one that made me laugh when I saw it was Quentin Swofford. That's the name that made me laugh, because it was Swofford was the name of the principal. Ken Swofford played the principal on Fame when I was doing Fame. So I gave Swofford, and Quentin was the character he played, Quentin Morlock. So I made it Quentin Swofford, because Swofford and I never got along at all. And, you know, he's on a ship that gets blown up. So Quentin Swofford. So that's the name that made me laugh.
That's great.
Ira, was
I
it
knew there was
CJ Cherry?
No,
Cherry?
before.
Wow, before that, geez.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, another question that kind of came to mind in this, and I know it's like I have like literally 3-4 pages of notes. Probably the most notes I've taken in any episode. But there's a quote in this episode that I like, and and if I fail, I fought the good fight. I finished the course. I've kept the faith. And I had to look it up. It's, you know, because Sisko says, I never heard you quote the Bible. So I wanted to know where it came from in the Bible, and it comes from 2 Timothy 4:7. But and it's about the Apostle Paul writing to Timothy about his life experience. And again, in many other instances, Ira, you've used biblical quotes. You had an episode called "Let He Who Is Without Sin." You had, which is John 8:7. You had an Ecclesiastes, "Nor the battle to the strong," which is a quote from that. Where do all? So you got the. Where does this come from? Like your expanded knowledge on these biblical references?
It's because they write in a hotel.
I am smitten, and have been my whole life. I've been smitten by beautiful words. They've been a big part of what makes life bearable in this bitch of a planet, as Beckett called it. You know, bitch of a world, whatever. So, and there's lovely phrases in the Bible. The one we quote here, I have kept the faith, believe it or not, the way I went to a memorial service when the director Sam Peckinpah died. You know, I think how much I like the work of Sam Peckinpah. And Robert Culp, the actor, who you probably know from The Greatest American Hero, if you know, or I Spy. He was a friend of Peckinpah's, and he gave it wasn't him. It was, I think, Lee Marvin. It might have been Lee Marvin, actually. It was one of them. Came up, and at the end, you know, because Peckinpah had a tough life and had a lot of fights and only got to direct like 13 films. And anyway, that was it. You know, he fought the good fight. He kept the faith. And to me, it's kind of like another quote from the Bible that is, now my son uses it all the time, and it's also from a Peckinpah film, Ride the High Country. All I want is to enter my house justified. You know, when it comes to my life, as I look back upon my life, kids, if there's one thing that continues to resonate with me, is that all I want is to enter my house justified. And who does that justifying? It's not you, it's not the world, it's you yourself. I have to justify myself to myself. I have to feel good about myself, you know, and that to me is, you know, and that's another Bible quote. You know, I don't read the Bible, you know. I you know, I'm not knocking it, you know. I finally read, you know, the Odyssey. I hadn't read the Odyssey, you know. If I can read them, I guess one day I'll read the Bible. But there's wonderful things in there, and they're usually said in a lovely and, you know,
poetic
manner. So that's where that came from. Long answer. Let's go. Give me another one. 3 goddamn pages. Give me another one.
Well, I do have another one for you, and this is you can refuse to answer if you like, but I made this correlation, could not be true, but as I was watching it, the owner of the newspaper was named Mr. Stone.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but correlate that to the owner of Paramount CBS, the Mr. Redstone. Now you don't have to confirm or deny that where it came from. Obviously, I understand the conflicts of interest, but that's what I thought of when I thought of Mr. Stone. Is there? Okay,
That's a possibility.
it's a possibility. Okay, I'll take that as that's good enough for me.
Speaking of stone, glass houses, right? So, yeah, I was wondering that too. I was like, I'm wondering if there's some kind of significant, but we always like to look into all these kind of things.
We do. Better than chalk on the sidewalk. Where does that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Ira.
Well, to tell you the truth, I remember watching these artists in Manhattan. I guess they do it out here too, but there was a period of time, I remember it was the mid to late 70s when I'd be walking like in the Village or something, and there would these people, these artists would be making these incredible chalk drawings on the sidewalk, and I'm talking really intricate, really quite beautiful. And this is before cell phones, so people couldn't even be taking pictures. There was no way to immortalize these things unless you had a freaking camera in your pocket. And I used to think that is like, what is that all about? That creative urge, that isn't about immortality, that isn't about it's going to hang up in a museum. It's not going to be bought by someone, it's going to get them nothing. It's not going to put bread on the table. It's not going to get their name known, but they had that urge to create. So it's a beautiful thing, but it's not to last, which at the time I found ineffably sad in a way. So the idea of, hey, look, I have a novel that I wrote that I keep thinking about self-publishing.
Oh.
Because it's not a science fiction novel. And of course, everyone told me, schmuck, if you're going to write a novel, write a science fiction novel. You could probably get that published, but I didn't want to do that. So I think about self-publishing, but it's like, you 100, 200 copies. Is it worth it, or not? So chalk on the sidewalk. That was
really cool.
Well, I will say it is worth it, because you never know how many lives you change down the road from your words. I just saw a documentary about Leonardo da Vinci's writings and how he was considering publishing his manuscripts, which he never got around to. And I just think of how the world would have benefited from those publishings. Another question for you. I noticed that Garrick is not in this episode, Andrew Robinson.
Oh.
And if you could have put him in the episode, or if you had thought of it, what would be the role that you would have maybe have made for it?
Yes, I noticed that. I don't think Andy was available.
Okay.
That's why he wasn't in it, because he wasn't a character we would have forgotten or chose to omit. So I'm pretty sure he wasn't available.
Okay.
Maybe he would have been the artist that JG portrayed.
Yeah, I mean, when I was looking back on it, it's funny when you say that, because at one point I was wondering if, I get, we thought of the Mutt and Jeff of it. That's why we had Jeff and Mark. But in some ways, I think JG and Mark might have been a better twosome as the cops, because I think they would have even been more threatening and made Jeff the artist, but this is something that 20 years later you're looking at, go, okay, well, maybe James more booming presence of Mark Alimo, but then it was also Wayoon and
right.
so there were reasons for it. but yeah, either he would have been another writer. We would have added one more writer if need be. We would have gotten him in there. Trust me, we would have gotten him in there.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so you noticed his absence like I did. I was like, wow, this is everybody
Absolutely.
except for one major guy that we really need.
Mhm. Malissa, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I am very curious about how you come up with dialogue because it's probably one of the hardest parts of writing it, in my opinion, is making it sound authentic, organic, like you're having an organic conversation, and it's not like, you know, everything is exposition. It's I don't know, you do write magic. I have to agree with Ryan.
I will say this. Well, first off, I just want to say one of the things that struck me was how freaking young Aaron looked.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I do
yeah.
remember this, and I
Yeah.
don't want to get into, because it's easy to get choked up about Aaron for obvious reasons. But Aaron was a character we made a conscious effort to put in the episode. You know, it was like, and this is the truth. This is the emis. I mean, it was like we didn't think he'd be that's why we added the character of the paper boy, the newsstand kid, because we just wanted Aaron in there. We wanted everyone in there. And though you know, now that you mention it, Cirroc, we didn't have
Max.
there either.
Yeah.
But I remember
Max.
we definitely wanted Aaron in there. Maybe Max wasn't available either. I don't know. But we had he looked so young. You know, out of makeup, he looked so young. I will say this, you know, writing is writing, and it's hard to, you know, when I started out, someone just told me it's just people talking to each other. Just write two people talking to each other, which is, I wish it was that easy. But this episode, I realize, does have one of the two of my, I think, I haven't watched any of the, you know, most of the episodes I haven't seen since the initial run. I've only seen like a handful of episodes since 1999, maybe 4 episodes in total, or 5. But this has one of my favorite lines that I wrote. There are two lines that I think of. One of them I'm not going to mention because my name isn't on the script. And the other one is in this, which is you are the dreamer and the dream.
Oh, love that line.
Which
Yeah.
is a line that I really, really like, and seems to be more and more important each day, because it's true. We all are. We're all the dreamers. And what we have to remember, the most difficult thing to remember, is that we're the dream as well. And if we could keep that in our heads, you know, that we have the chance of not just dreaming it, but making it come true, you know, of helping to make it come true, things would get done, you know, but we get caught up in the opposite of that, the helplessness, you know, that we have no control, that the world is too much with us, it's too big, we can't do anything, we're helpless. But we are the fucking dream. We are each of us, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, as Jack Harris once said, if I could only remember the things that I know.
Totally. You don't have to keep learning the same lesson over and over again.
Right.
Yeah, see, that's the goddamn trouble with existence and being alive. You know, like we just refuse to remember the things that we know, that would make things better for all of us, I think.
Yeah. Also, you know, one of the lines I liked was delivered by Sadiq when he says, "Oh, how I long for a gun."
Sid, was that you, Sid?
I just love the way he put that out there. It's just
funny.
But this is my other question for you. And this was my line, actually. And I said, today or 100 years from now, as far as they're concerned, will always be niggas. And it might have been, it has to be the first and only time that word, the N word, was used on Star Trek. What was the pushback against using this word on, basically family television?
Look, obviously the pushback was you can only say it once.
Right.
Once enough. But I had this, and obviously we had Avery in our corner. So you say no to Avery.
Right, you go talk to him.
I mean, Avery probably believes they were always saying no to him, but the fact is,
Well, he wanted it in there too, so obviously.
Yeah, of course. Well, obviously, I spoke to him about it. It wasn't something that you just do, but it just seemed like the verisimilitude of the scenes. I wanted, he talked about the ambulance that comes at the end, to pick him up, and that ambulance, which you don't get to see too well, but that is a grimy. It is not a sparkling, clean, shiny ambulance that you see in every movie and every TV show. He said, because that's what they would send, to Harlem. They would send the shitty ambulance because either the hospital, that's all they had, or if it was to a white hospital, they would send, the shittiest, equipment that they have. So it was that sense of trying to get to the reality of it. And Jimmy, to give him because the audience, I mean, look, I felt the same way at first. We had a lot of discussions, Hans and I, and in the writing room too, it's like, Jake Sisko is going to be a street kid. Who's going to buy it? Forget about you and playing it. It's like, is the audience going to buy it? How is the audience going to believe it's not just Jake Sisko pretending to be, a street kid because you didn't have makeup, right? You didn't have, you weren't coming out from behind a mask. We gave you a little stash that kind of helped, but we had to get the audience to think, whoa, this is a different character, Yes, it's Jake, metaphysically maybe, but it's a different character. And one of those ways would be talking. We couldn't cuss, right? We couldn't say the 7 censored words. So what can we do? And it seemed like that would give it a sense of reality. And you couldn't do it today.
Can I just say that the contrast that you guys were worried about whether it would work to see, Jake Sisko suddenly being Jimmy, whatever his last name was, that stark contrast and the possibility of it not working is precisely what made it so good. Is it was so jarring to see this kid that's bright and has this whole future. He has the best manners. He's got a great family and great friends. And he's just like the upright citizen. To think that had he been born a few centuries earlier, this would be the life that he would be forced into. That contrast shows the contrast in our future and our past, I thought. And it made it so stark where people go like, holy shit, somebody as cool as Jake Sisko would have been forced into this kind of life that we kind of look down on, and that's what I thought actually really worked about that. And I also want to point out very quickly that I had a feeling you were going to say, I am the dreamer, or you are the dreamer, and the dream was going to be your favorite line, because not only that Benny Russell and Ben Sisko, but Avery Brooks himself epitomizes that line as well as being the dreamer and the dream. So I thought that was a really fitting line for him as well. But I want to ask you one more thing, Ira, and that is about, you guys have mentioned in the past several times, and I think this is just always like a big problem with sci-fi, is when you guys come up with a really cool story, now you have to come up with the science and the techno babble of like, okay, now how do we appease the nerds to explain why this is happening? And I feel like in this episode, you didn't really have to worry about the science to explain it, but you kind of were beholden to the fact that you're doing this series and you have to explain it in universe as to why this is happening and how it still fits into the universe. Did you feel that pressure where you're like, okay, we can't just do this episode. We have to still explain, okay, let's see, it's the Bajorans, he's seeing visions. How do we tie it in to still make it fit within the Star Trek universe?
Well, compared to my time on TNG and the first 2 seasons of DS9, you know, I had cut bait with that a couple of seasons ago. You know, Rick had to be the guy to, you know, he was always cracking the whip, you know, the past tense. We, you know, one of the things we spent so much time in those episodes explaining, God, was that miserable.
That's exactly
so,
what.
talk about having you focus on the wrong goddamn thing, you know. But by now it was like, who cares? You know, the quickest way just to get us in there, and you know, the audience is with us or they're against us. So no, in this episode, I remember a lot of time spent worrying. Maybe we did a little bit, but not a lot. The other thing I just want to mention is Brock Peters,
yes,
who is just freaking fantastic in this episode. And I loved, you know, I was thinking about him because when Sidney Poitier died recently, the only time I ever saw him in person was when I went to the funeral service for Brock Peters, and he was there giving one of the eulogies. And at that point, he was in his 70s and was just an amazing presence. I mean, God, what a presence. But Brock Peters, I love that guy so much. I mean, I loved him, you know, he was one of those character people I loved growing up, as I love so many character people. But from, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird, from Major Dundee, from a bunch of things that he did. And to have him in this show, not only be, you know, Sisko's dad, which is fine and more than enough, but to have him be that preacher, to have him be that man who's telling Sisko, but telling us how it is, you know, speaking truth, you know, universal truth, was just fantastic. And I think he does a great job. And that in this watch of the episode, for me, you know, every time he was on screen, I was like, we had Brock Peters on the show. We had some really great actors that we brought in, you know. That's something that fills me with pride. I feel like I could enter my house justified with the Brock Peters of it all.
Yeah.
That was my first note, was when Joseph Sisko walked in. I had forgotten he was in this episode. And when he walked in, it was like this unexpected. I was like, that's why I put in all capital letters, Joseph Sisko, yay. So I'm like, all right. God bless him. He lights up a room and he makes everything better. But what were you saying, Cirroc?
I was going to say, going back to the line that we talked about, you know, where Jake delivers about today or 100 years from now. You know, one of the things that I wish is that this story would become absurd because society has moved far beyond this point of thinking. And so, you know, one day, someday, people can look at this and say, wow, I can't believe people behave like this, or I can't believe that was going on in the world. And I hope that that's the case. But unfortunately, the reason why this episode resonates so much is because it's still something that we have to deal with in the headlines when we turn on the television and see the news and see Black people, you know, having to deal with police brutality, being killed by the police for very minor things. And unfortunately, it's still an issue and a topic that is making headlines and that we have to deal with society as a society. So I pray that one day that we can look back at this and look at it as a something of an archaic thing, of something that we look back and say this is a bad time in our history. But unfortunately, it's a current time in our history, and we haven't really moved past it. When you were writing it, did you? I know this was, we still had the the Rodney King situation that happened during us filming. There were other things that happened during the production that kind of reflected this same kind of storyline. But did you ever think that now, 25 or 20 some years later, that we would still be seeing, guys like Jimmy getting beat up on, in front of the public and murdered?
I used to be told, the older you get, the tougher it is to see history repeating itself and feeling that sense of helplessness. So yes, it is amazing to me that we are, the Obama presidency didn't seem to move the needle the way we thought it would. I would, this is getting a little bit off topic, just indulge me here. Everyone out there should read a book from 1998, which is not that long ago, called Confederates in the Attic. It was a very popular book at the time. Now, of course, it's forgotten because 20 years, nothing lasts. But this was a book that was written in 1998 by a great journalist who unfortunately passed away, a couple of years ago, Tony Hurwitz. It started out, he wanted to interview and look into Civil War reenactors. You know how they reenact Civil War battles?
Yep.
Yeah.
He thought that would be an interesting topic. And what he discovered was something a whole lot deeper. And everything that has happened in the last 6 years, the Trump years, everything that's happened, it's nothing new. It shouldn't be a surprise. If you read this book, it was all there all the time. America is a fractured land. It always has been. People cannot agree on what this country is supposed to be, what this country's past was, and the meaning of that past. It's all there in this book. I started to read it again, recently. And it's become what was once almost humorous about this subculture, and these people who, still explaining why the Civil War was not about slavery. It was about states' rights, all that kind of stuff. It's not that funny anymore. It's not funny at all, obviously. But anyway, that's a book that in some ways should make people feel better, because it's kind of good now that it's all out in the open. It's all, it's not a sleeping power that's just waiting for its chance. It thinks its chance has come. We are battling right now for the soul of this country. That's what this is all about, for the soul of this country. Everyone talks about, is democracy going to last? I don't have a freaking clue, and it might not. It is on the knife edge right now. And that's not being pessimistic. That's just saying it in a way. It's a good thing, because you can't say we didn't know, our head was in the sand, this happened, underground. It's not underground anymore, baby. It's a fight. It's a fight. It ain't a fight with guns yet, but it's a fight for the soul of this country. And I can talk about this because Far Beyond the Stars, should be out of date, should be a relic from the past, should be a museum piece. And the fact that it isn't says something very clear. And we all have to face it. That's the thing. It's not a pretty thing to face, but we have to face it. And we all have to decide what we're going to do about it and how we're going to stand our ground. And I don't mean stand our ground in the sense of,
Trayvon Martin, not like that kind of stand.
Getting a gun and pointing it at someone. But
Yeah.
we have to do what we feel is best. Because the other side, and I hate to talk about sides, but they are a very vocal minority, and they are a minority, but they are very vocal, they are very loud, and we are not as loud and we are not as vocal, though there is actually a lot more of us. So anyway, this is the topic. This is what happens when you talk about a show. You won't get this on His Way, but talking about His Way, but
Well,
something like this, here's something that also I think is worthwhile. If Star Trek today wanted to do a show, a show that had something to do with Deep Space Nine, it would be the Benny Russell show. That to me is the only story worth telling.
Wow.
Follow Benny Russell as he starts publishing. It's like an alternate history. You want to do sci-fi, do an alternate history of the United States. That if those Deep Space Nine stories, a black captain starts to get published, what happens when a filmmaker wants to make a movie about it? What would be the cultural butterfly, the butterfly effect, how one little thing could change everything? What would America be like if Benny Russell, his Deep Space Nine stories started to become popular within?
Well,
yeah.
I think, yeah. Go ahead.
No,
Melissa.
I was just gonna say, which is another reason why this episode is so important, because we're fighting in our schools right now against teaching this kind of thing in classrooms. We still want to bury our head in the sand, where a lot of people do, and we're not going to accomplish anything if we don't look at this stuff, if we don't look at the underbelly. So you're right in saying that it's good that it's being exposed, because ignoring it isn't going to make the problem go away.
People are scared. People are very, very frightened, and they have. I mean, this is a big subject, and they have the middle class. We all know what's going on. If the middle class was the glue that held democracy together, the dispersal of the middle class, the rise of corporate America since the 80s, with their unlimited power, there are no real checks and balances anymore. A certain president, a certain popular president whose name I won't mention, who kind of gave the corporations carte blanche, forget monopolies anymore, give America to the corporations. Well, this is part of that result. So there's a lot of people who are disenfranchised. The American dream isn't working for them. They need someone to blame. They always blame the wrong people, not just here in America, but all over. Blame the people, blame minorities of all different types, because their lives have been, kind of cut down by a lack of opportunities that they expected to have in their lives. And I get that, and that is discouraging. But what they then do is they listen to leaders who they think are there to help them, who don't give a goddamn about them at all, and who are part of that corporate structure, who are only going to screw them over, But instead of looking here, it's like, look at this. You're afraid of the influx of minorities. You're afraid of people of color getting more power. That's what you're supposed to be frightened of. Forget the fact that it's all going to be a corporate culture that's going to take away any agency at all that you might have. But no, worry about the guy who's going to mow your lawn, or the service workers who are doing jobs that you don't want to do and don't want your kids to do, that's
Well, that's exactly what you touch on in this episode. You actually mentioned Langston Hughes, and
Right.
Langston Hughes writes the poem about what happens to a dream deferred, right?
Right.
And that we're suffering through this time in which people have had their dreams deferred, and what happens to them as a result of it. But I want to say, you mentioned just now about what would have happened if Benny Russell had published those stories, and what kind of world would we have be living in. But I would suggest that the work that you did with Sisko and Deep Space Nine is exactly that kind of publishing of the story that you're wishing for. So you actually did publish the story,
Yeah.
except it's as Sisko in Deep Space Nine. And that impact on the world, in my opinion, led to Obama becoming president, because I believe that having a Sisko character in the lexicon of popular culture, showing this kind of black man as a leader, allowed and broke down certain stereotypes, allowed for the idea to exist that somebody like Barack Obama could come along and be a leader. So I believe that Sisko was kind of a bridge to that
Totally.
progress.
Well, and I think everyone's got to tip the hats to Michael Piller, because let's not forget, Michael from the very, 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 very beginning insisted on having a captain of color. That was a non-issue for him. I mean, that was a deal breaker. I'm sure Rick had the same feeling. I talked to Michael about it, so I know that. I didn't really, this is before I came back onto the, before the show even had started. So he was just schmoozing me at the time, Michael, but he kept telling me from the get-go, that's what it's going to be. There's no doubt we're going for that. So hats off, like I said, to Michael Piller and to Rick, because that was their decision. I mean, we inherited it, and we're happy to do so. But they did it. So God bless them, one and all.
And to Nog the cat, who's like, "Are you still talking to these guys?"
It's really odd, because I've been on Zooms all day, obviously, most of the time when I'm doing the show I'm working on, and he comes like for 10 minutes and leaves, or 5 minutes and leaves. But this time he's like, he must know it's some kind of connection with Aaron. I don't know why.
Yeah. He's like, this one's important. So
Nog, I don't know.
I really hate doing this, but we have to run. We went quite a bit over, but if there's one episode that it's okay to go way over on, I think it's this one, right? We do want to thank you, Ira, for all the work that you've done and the huge amount of time you just gave us today. It was really cool. We really appreciate it.
And thank you for bringing us these stories, because they're rare stories to hear and see and witness, and it's beautiful when they pop up. So thank you for that.
And let me also say this, Ira. When I first auditioned for Star Trek, they asked me, "Do you watch Star Trek?" And I said, "No, not really." And they asked me, "What kind of shows do you like?" And I said The Twilight Zone still is one of my favorite shows, and I still think it's probably the best show of all time, one of the best. But now, as I'm watching DS9, Ira, I want to thank you as well, because I feel like I'm part of a Twilight Zone type show, and to me, this is as good as it gets, and which would make you, the modern Rod Serling to some degree. So thank you for bringing us the high level of quality that guys like Twilight Zone and the great shows of the past have brought us. In my opinion, DS9 is right there in the company amongst those stars. So thanks for that too as well, Ira.
And far beyond the stars.
Cirroc, you know, it's okay to feel proud. You should feel proud. You're part of quality, certainly a quality Star Trek show. I'll say that. I always hate to bring Star Trek out of the Star Trek world, but you know, you should feel good. You know, you took a part that could have been a groaner. Let's face it. You know, the kid could have been a groaner, and I know it's a lot of people were involved in bringing that character to life, obviously, but the bottom line is you had to, you know, you had to be in front of the camera and you had to pull it off. No matter what lines were given to you, no matter what the scenes were, whatever, you had to ultimately pull it off, and you did. And that no one can ever take that away from you. You should know that in your head and your heart, and you should feel good about it.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you.
All right. And also, we want to give a very special thanks as well to Carmen, aka Skillet, TJ Jackson-Bey out in Missouri, Bill Victor Arucan.
Arucan.
There it is. Yvette Blackmon, Homer Freezy out somewhere in New Yeezy. Yvette, sorry, we already said Yvette Blackmon. This is a long list now. Eve England out in Wales, Dr. Marie Segal, Titus Mohler, Tim Baum, Darlena Marie, John Mann, Rex A. Wood, Dr. Mohamed Noor, Joe Balsarotti, Tierney C. Dieckmann, Ed Mower, Anil O. Polat, Anil K. Chander, Thomas Collings, Lawrence Niels, Isaac Stock, and Ed Jarreau. And a very, very special thanks to Dr. Susan V. Gruner. Ira, thank you for everything. We really appreciate your time. We hope to see you again
Thank you,
very soon. And everybody at home, stick around. We've got the free-for-all next on The Seventh Rule. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Seventh Rule. This is the free-for-all. Malissa is back. Cirroc is back. And praise be to the prophets, Ira Stephen Behr is back. We're also joined by Dr. Susan V. Gruner, Tierney C. Dieckmann, Grandpa One out in space, Eve England out in Wales, Ed Jarrett is here, Anil Polat is floating around Deep Space Nine, Homer Freezy is somewhere in New Yeezy, Goldu Scott is looming, Lawrence Niels is here, and TJ Jackson-Bey is gracing us with his presence. Real quick, something I wanted to ask just to get us started here. And Cirroc, actually, I don't know if you or Ira would have a better answer for this, but when you guys were setting up to shoot this episode and when this episode was being shot, I can only imagine there was a different mood around, you know, production. And I was wondering if people were in kind of a lighter, happier, more fun mood because you didn't have to wear makeup. You were going in a different location. Some people might have thought, hey, this is fun to play dress up in 50s garb. You know, was it kind of like a fun, you know, field trip kind of atmosphere, or were people in more of a somber mood? I mean, I don't know if from the production side or from the actor side, if there was like a different mood around the shoot.
Well, I can say that, you know, on the set, there was an electricity there that you don't really find on, you know, the normal kind of filler episodes per se. There was a lot of energy there. All the departments were like on full alert. You know, all the makeup guys, all the hair people, there was so many costumes involved with everybody being in wardrobe. I remember also a lot of crane shots, so that we know huge cranes being brought into the back lot over there at Paramount. So and also people on the set coming to visit. So, you know, normally you didn't have too many people coming to check things out, but for this moment, there were all types of department, you know, publicity department, the guys over here, the, you know, the Bender, Goldman, and Helper guys. Everybody was there trying to, you know, take in what was going on. But I do remember the electricity. And the energy was up super high. I also remember Avery was up with his energy and really excited and animated about directing this piece. And so it was kind of contagious. Avery's energy was contagious on the set. Seemed like everybody caught, you know, the excitement bug for this one. Ira, what was the production meetings like? Was it similar like that?
Yeah, I mean, the one everyone points to again is Trials and Tribulations, where it was like being at summer camp. It got to be almost overwhelming. Everyone was having too good a time. People were giddy about doing that episode. But with Far Beyond the Stars, I think you said it quite rightly, Cirroc. I just think there was electricity about it. People were just on their game. I mean, it wasn't like they were having a better time necessarily, though some of the actors, I think, were happy to be out of makeup for a week. But you could just feel it. When I never got to, or almost never got to go down to the set for any extended time. We were just too busy. But I made it, a point to stay one night quite late, and it was like I didn't do that during the week. I wasn't out till 11 o'clock at night sitting out there on the New York street at Paramount, but I just wanted to say that I was at least a part of this episode. I got to witness some of this episode. So yeah, I think we all had that bug. But yeah, with the writers, we were also breaking out the stories and still trying to get through the season. So busy. There were no goddamn victory laps until.
TJ, so good to see you again. Have you seen this episode recently? I think you may have. What'd you think?
Oh man, there's so much in this episode. This episode is a 100 out of 10 in my book. It is the best episode of Star Trek that has ever aired, period. And the story I have to share is that I didn't watch it when it first aired because of life at that time. It was actually some years later when I was able to do like a full rewatch and see the episodes that I didn't get to see during that time. So some of the Dominion War, I didn't really know how it ended and all of that stuff. But in that journey, I watched this episode and I just stopped dead in my tracks and say, I cannot believe that I have not seen this before, that I didn't hear about it, that I didn't know that it existed. It brought me to tears because Star Trek is something I love, and knowing that they visited this subject in such, I mean, there's no, it's not sugar-coated at all. It's out there for everybody to see. And it felt real, and it felt, it just hit me right in the chest in such a good way to know that Star Trek visited this subject. They didn't sugarcoat it. They put it out there for everybody to see. And there it is. I mean, there are so many, lines and story points in this episode that just feels so real. Like I've seen situations like that. I've known it. And that's just the way it is. And Benny says, wishing never changed a damn thing. Staying calm never changed a damn thing. And I mean, I can get some people worked up, but I mean, it's just true. It's just true that, when things aren't the way we want them to be, we have to do something to bring about that change. And, that's what Benny was doing, writing these stories, was he was going to be the agent of change in his world. Mm-hmm. And so I'm inspired by that. And I'm inspired by, Joseph Sisko telling him to write the truth in your heart, walk with the prophets, Brother Benny, show us the way. He said, what do you say? Write the words that will lead us out of this darkness onto the path of righteousness. So Priest Joseph has got it going on.
Totally.
And I'm inspired.
Awesome. That's good stuff. Well, Dr. Susan B. Gruner out in Florida, that's a tough act to follow, but have you watched this episode recently? I think you may have. Any thoughts on it?
Yes, multiples. I think TJ pretty much said it all, but I do remember watching it when it came out and thinking, wow, typical Deep Space Nine, knocking it out of the park again, better than any other. As much as I love all the Star Treks, nobody had an episode like this ever, but Deep Space Nine. And having just watched it, I completely forgot about Cirroc's, the word that he said. So for a minute there, I watched it yesterday, I sat back and I went, whoa, I can't believe he said that, on Deep Space Nine. And then what year is it? 90 something?
98.
98. And just blew me away again. The whole thing is just gut wrenching, well done. I loved everything about it. The way it was produced, the lighting, the costumes. Subject is hard to watch, but it was in some ways still reality. Maybe not in that exact same way, but I would like to say that things are completely different now. They're not, but that makes Deep Space Nine again relevant today as it was the day they filmed that, the day that they had it on television. And that's enough from me. I think it's one of the best episodes ever as well.
And you
Well
said
done.
the thing that we all always agree on, that Deep Space Nine just keeps getting more and more relevant. Well, Tierney C. Dieckmann, I don't know if you've seen this episode recently. Any thoughts on it?
Oh, many thoughts. This is absolutely my favorite episode. There's no question. Of every show and every season, this is my favorite. And out of the probably hundreds of notes, multiple pages I have taken for this episode, I definitely whittled it down to one specific thing, and that would be that, to me, this episode represents why Star Trek is here, why it's here, and why shows like it exist. And it isn't just about racism, this episode. I mean, like Sue had said, I wish it wasn't relevant today, but it is. It's timeless, beautifully, painfully timeless, and that's just how it is. And there are other aspects of it with the racism that are, anyway, we'll go over that. But one thing I'd like to cover with it is that it isn't just about that, at least not to me. This, to me, represents a dawning of a new age in literary and scientific enlightenment through sci-fi. Again, why we have Star Trek. The 50s is where it really, really all began. I mean, if you can't really see everything in this room, but it's basically a tribute to classic sci-fi. It's just bloody everywhere. And at that time, World War II's over, and now you've got the Red Scare. You're smack in the middle of the atomic age, the baby boomer era, and people's minds are flooded with fear and hope for the past and for the future. And that bred a lot of really incredible things of all definitions of the word. And that line, "You are the dreamer and the dream," it's a wonderful line, and it's really, really perfect to encapsulate everything I love about not just Star Trek, but sci-fi in general, what Roddenberry gave us and what everyone going forward gave us. I mean, everything that we consume it's a glimpse into someone else's mind, someone else's dream. And whether that be Benny Russell or Ira Steven Behr or Gene Roddenberry or anyone here in the group, anyone watching, listening, we create this stuff. And I think a lot of people don't realize, especially newcomers, kids in their late teens, early 20s that are starting to binge this through streaming services or wherever they're getting it, don't think of, where does this come from? Where is this starting? And it starts in a really hard place, a tough time. This is a really good representation of what was going on, what people went through. You can make it sounds terrible. You can make it a morbid drinking game, reading classic sci-fi, of how many racist, misogynistic, and bigoted moments there are before page 50 of anything that's written before, actually not even, I was going to say before 1970, make it, before the contemporary, but even then. And it just continues. It's why this episode is so important. And then you have Avery, this is one of his most powerful performances, like undeniably. I've become a little desensitized to a lot of episodes that I've watched over and over and over again, but not this one. There is too much to love. There is too much in it. And there is too much with that performance. And he directs it as well, which is perfect that he does. He understands, he knows. A lot of us don't. We have no freaking idea what it would feel like. And he puts himself into this, his actual self, and you see it and you feel it. And he has that speech, that monologue at the end. And you feel it, all of it. It all comes through that you can't kill his idea. You can't kill the dreams. You can't kill the future. And God, I love it so much.
Tierney, that line you mentioned, you're not just the dreamer, but the dream. That's what Ira was saying was his favorite line as well. That was pretty much the exclamation point on this episode in a lot of ways. It's a really good one. We do have to get everybody in here real quick, but that was great. Lawrence Niels is out in New York. How are you?
I am okay. I'm actually in Atlantic City. Not New York today.
I thought you lived in New York, no?
I do live in New York, but I am performing tonight. So I'm in
cool.
Atlantic City. But I was not going to miss this.
What do you do?
Tierney, by the way, I'm recovering from everything you just said. If I'm stumbling through my words.
I'm recovering too. I still had more, but they know me. I never shut the hell up.
I'm singing. I'm singing. My band is playing in Atlantic City tonight. So
Cool. Nice.
Yeah, no, this episode has always spoken directly to me in ways that, Star Trek speaks to all of us, which is why, on multiple levels, which is why I think we all enjoy the series. Not just from entertainment value, but on a moral level or a thought level. And then this episode aired, and I remember just literally being floored. And when it was done, calling my uncle and my mother, who could care less about science fiction, going, "You both need to come here, sit down and watch this with me right now." because I taped it on VCR. And I was like, I went back around the table. I was like, we have to watch this right now. And it still does. You're right. I recently rewatched it about a month ago, and then I watched it again a couple of days ago. And the two things that jumped out at me was it still has the same emotional resonance. The whole episode, but especially Benny's monologue at the end. And the second thing that jumped out at me that I'm not sure jumped out at me before was, wow, this really, really was ahead of its time. Like, this is 1998, and I think it was relevant then, it's relevant now, but I remember thinking to myself, wow, this aired 30 years ago when I watched it just a few days ago. I was like, there are shows today that wouldn't tackle this in such an unvarnished manner
Right.
today, because they'd be worried about advertisers or people in social media attacking it. And DS9 went there, and the entire cast, from what we see on the screen, Cirroc and Ira would know better, obviously, because they were there, but they all jumped into the deep end of the pool to tell this story, so that it could relate to everybody. And that still to this day really, really resonates with me. This episode, along with just seeing them out of makeup in New York. There's a lot. Also, there's an interesting, something else I'm not sure I noticed, I realized in previous watchings, and I've probably seen this episode 100 times, is there's a very, it's not disarming, because there are lots of, for an episode that could be called very heavy, there are a lot of genuinely hilarious moments in it. Darlene's introduction is probably one of the funniest things that I've.
She's got a worm in her belly.
Yeah, she's got a worm in her belly. This is
Yeah.
So it is probably one of the funniest moments. Also, everything that Armin Shimmerman does in this entire episode is just drop dead funny, even when he's being serious. But it doesn't take away from any of the strength of the message that the story was telling. And there are a lot of little subtle things upon rewatching that resonate more with me, especially as I've grown up being a Black man in America from when I saw this 30 years ago. Something, again, I didn't notice recently, that Rene Auberjonois never makes eye contact with Benny at the end when he's basically getting ready to fire him and telling him everything. And I'm like, I've seen this episode 70, 80 times. How have I never really caught on to that until only recently?
Literally have that in my notes. I'm so glad I'm not the only one that noticed it.
No. Because well, I'm actually, the reason why I watched it a couple of months ago is because I'm working on a project with a friend of mine based around this. We've been working on it for like the last 6 months. So it was fortuitous that this came up. So I've been delving into it. But it was just the way that he just refused to acknowledge him even in that moment. Acknowledge him because he was ashamed, acknowledge him because he thought it was less than. It can be interpreted in any number of ways, and only the cast on set and Rene would know how he was interpreting as an actor. But it jumped out at me in a way it never did before, especially, I guess, now as I've grown up and had different life experiences as an adult. So yeah, this whole thing is just really powerful. Just kudos to everybody for embracing it for everything that it was at the time, everything that they were trying to share for people who might not know what it is behind in the past, and what it still represents today. I mean, Cirroc, I know this is going to sound not going to sound horrible. I'm mumbling my words, I'm sorry. Obviously, the cast members of color would connect to this script, this story in a slightly different way than the other cast. Did you guys at the time think that you were working on what would end up being a legacy piece? I kind of put this up here with Ragtime the Musical when I think of stories, when I think of writing that tells our story as Black Americans. I really put it up there. But obviously, when they were writing Ragtime, they knew they were doing that. Did you guys know you were doing that when you were working on Far Beyond the Stars, or was it just another DS9 episode for you?
No, I mean, you read the script and you know that it's a good story. I mean, right off top, as soon as you read a script, you know if it's exceptional, if it's average, what your part in it is. So yeah, right away we knew that this is a big story, but ultimately, who had the biggest and best perspective on it was Avery, who was, the maestro of this whole event. So he had the broadest and best understanding of what the impact was, what the significance of this story is. Obviously, something he grew up during that time period, so he's intimately familiar with the 50s and 60s and that period of time. So no, I think I was just focused on my part and following my direction and making sure that I, don't fumble the ball and cost us the game. That's all. That's what I come into the equation with. Not so much as what is the legacy of this or what is the impact going to be. I don't think we really go into it like that. Perhaps Avery did, but I just wanted to make sure that I got my parts right.
And Cirroc, by the way, we didn't talk about it while we were recording earlier, but you killed your role. It was so good watching you do this other role. And I saw a couple Cirroc-isms in Jimmy that I never saw in Jake. And it was really good to see. It was really cool. And you killed it. It seemed like you were like, all right, I'm gonna nail this.
Yeah. That mustache in real life. I was digging that mustache.
Yeah. And by the way, Lawrence, kudos to you for putting the that background, which is the sketch of Deep Space Nine that I paused it on when we were watching because it looks so cool.
Cool.
So Anil, Anil's like, wow, you guys, this is heavy. Is this no pressure? I don't know if you've seen the episode recently or if you have any thoughts of it from the past or if you have any questions for Ira or Cirroc.
Yeah, I think if I were to boil it down, sort of, when thinking at a broad level, I would say, like, when I think of the next generation, I think of that's the future we want, right? Yeah. Like, that's the perfect future. And what I like about Deep Space Nine, especially this episode, is it's like, you guys want that future, like us as the audience, but we have a long way to go to get there. And I really like this episode because it's like, you see, like, you start to really realize, like, you take it for granted, at least I did. Oh yeah, like, we have this captain and we have, this diverse cast, but when you start thinking about it, it's not too long ago that would have been impossible. And it really kind of, usually when you watch a TV show, the lens is on the show, you're the viewer. I really feel like this episode, the lens is on us, like, as the viewer. And I think you're the dream and the dreamer hits us too. You're like, look, if you want, as I feel like as Trekkies, we all want the utopian future. Like, we all want that to be the future, but I don't know if we always make the connection between now and how we get there. And what, I just imagine people in the Deep Space Nine era looking back on us, if you would be like, what are you, like, whoa. And of course we do have episodes where we do look at that, but I just really felt like this was kind of a lens on us. This was, the show was watching us in a way. And I just, it's one of the two episodes I think of when I think of Deep Space Nine. This episode and In the Pale Moonlight, those are the Deep Space Nine episodes to me. So yeah, nice. I love this episode.
Very nice. I'm glad you said what the other one was, because if you just said it's one of the two, anyway, we were like, you can't stop there. You got to tell us. Grandpa One, you've been muted, but I watched you and you've said yes a bunch of times when people were talking. Any thoughts?
Oh, quite a bit. Full disclosure, this episode meant a lot. One of the reasons was my father was a Presbyterian minister for over 50 years. He marched with Dr. King. He got arrested with Dr. King. And I feel I've dropped the ball because I'm a coward. I avoided controversy because I was in the military, but I'm wearing this shirt now that I got yesterday, Jesus Christ Superstar for Black Lives Matters. And, you know, I want to apologize to Dominique, Cerise, Jordan, and Miles, because I didn't march with you. But I'm done being a coward. I will march with you tomorrow. That's how I was brought up. That's why this episode is emotional. To go to the episode, there was a couple of scenes that really meant a lot. One of them was when Michael Dorn was in the cafe and they're like, why are you down here? And he's like, they want me to play for them, but they don't want me to live with them. And the other was when Avery was jacked up by the cops just because he was walking. You know, you don't belong here. Yeah, where's my apartment's up here. No, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, my dad spent his life fighting that. And now I'm ready to take the torch. So I'm going to march around tomorrow in a red city wearing this shirt. And, you know, whatever happens to be damned.
We're with you too, my friend. God, every one of you guys should have your own podcast. You guys are better than we are at this.
You, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Okay. Eve England out in Wales. How are you today?
Yeah, good, thanks. That's all quite emotional. Following Tim's section, I mean, what Tim and also Anil just said about you have to live the dream, and that's what I get at that last monologue with Sisko is it's not ever going to happen for everyone unless you live that dream, and he is living that dream. He doesn't know if it's a dream or not, but he's living it, so he has to continue and doing all of the important things that he's doing. So I think that was really impactful. But I watched it twice this morning, and it just always shocks me how the intensity hits you. It's completely gripping. It's just emotionally charged the whole way through, and the performances, the dialogue, it just commands the attention, you know, right the way through the episode, even though you have, you know, the pockets of humor, but then there's always that underlying sort of nervousness and sort of, you're always anticipating something bad's going to happen throughout the whole episode. And I just found that the noise, the costumes, everything, because it is so different to what we normally see, and the noise particularly got me in terms of the street noise and outside the cafe, for example, just made it all like even more real than. So I think it just, even though you are going back in time into the 50s, it just feels more real than anything we ever see on the show, which particularly struck me when I watched it again today. And I'd forgotten, I think what Sue just said, it was so jarring, the language that was being used, and I'd forgotten, and I don't know whether maybe I've watched it before and they've dubbed it out, possibly, I don't know. But so I had a question for Ira in respect of, you know, the use of language, the conscious decision to use that, whether that was difficult to get approved or to include in the script, and you know, what the thought process was for making that real emphasis of, you know, this is what's happened and we need to make a point and get the message across about what we're trying to achieve here.
Unlike some of the other issues and battles we had to fight, I don't recall that as being like a major knockdown, drag out fight. I mean, we were allowed to say it once, I know that, and that was it. I mean, basically, you know, if you're going to do something like this, you don't want to sugarcoat it. You don't want to make it too easy for people. You don't want the audience to be too comfortable while they're watching it. In fact, you want it to be the opposite. You want to try to, you know, make them have to deal with the episode and deal with everything that the episode, all the questions that are raised by the episode. So the language was important. I know they wouldn't let us use cuss words. That was out of the question. They weren't going to let us use, you know, the as I said before, the 7 censored words. We couldn't use any of those. But I thought, you know, the ownership of that word, the appropriation of that word, you know, as the strength rather than a weakness, I just thought was important for the verisimilitude of the episode. And, you know, and coming out of Jake was just so discomforting that, you know, it was a no-brainer that's how it should go. So that's what we did. And no, but in terms of no, I don't remember that. I don't have any great story about having to go in and pound the desk and say, we're doing this or I quit, none of that stuff.
But you would have if you had to.
Hey, I was always up for a good.
and
that's
a skirmish.
And that's what was that's why we got away, because finally it was like, really want to fight with Ira? You really don't, you know.
You know he's gonna do it.
You know, there's always a movie or another show to deal with. So so no, that's the answer.
Thanks, Eve. Ed, how are you? I don't know if you've seen this episode recently or if you remember it, or if you have any thoughts on it or questions for Mr. Ira Stephen Behr.
Doing well. I'm out here in snowpack Chicago, by the way.
Nice.
I saw the episode when it aired. I've watched it a number of times over the years, and I watched it yesterday just to prep. And I mean, clearly, especially for me, the best Star Trek episode, period. I would go on that to probably say the best and most important episode in television, period. I mean, it was raw. It really represents exactly what Star Trek is. And unlike some of the other episodes in all of the various series where they have a message that they're portraying that's subtle, or it's kind of in between the lines, this was raw. And it had to be. It really had to be. Tierney got one of my favorite lines, and I think it was Ira's. The other line that really shown for me is Benny when he says, "You cannot destroy an idea. It isn't here. It is real," and that really brings hope. You know, I mean, unfortunately, this is clearly something we're dealing with today. The episode was so profound. Avery's performance was just chilling. In his monologue when he falls to the floor in pain, I mean, you couldn't help but feel that personally at the time you were watching it, and it's just remarkable. I can't say enough about how important the episode was and how much I adore it.
Wow, great stuff. Sorry about all the snow, though. Okay, well, Goldu Scott, how are you?
I'm doing pretty.
I
pretty
know.
well,
I know you've seen this episode recently.
I literally watched the episode right before I dialed in for this recording. Finished it right. I want it to be as fresh in my mind as it possibly could. Like everybody else has said, I think that this is definitely the best episode of the Star Trek franchise. I think it is. It's up there with very important storytelling back to when we were first, writing on rocks in caves, and is unfortunately as relevant as it was when it came out. But I do think that I pulled a slight different message from it this time as I have, which is great to watch it so many times and pull different things out of each viewing. And how important art is what I really pulled a lot in here, particularly with the line where the preacher Joe said, write those words, Benny, when he was trying to convince me, write those words, Benny, let them know the glory of what is ahead. And then to connect that later with, you can pulp a story, but you can't destroy an idea. I think it was so important that Benny took that action, and it is through the action of artists, which I think is not spotlighted enough. Painters, poets, writers, TV producers, actors, everyone, is to get this action in motion and to perpetuate an action that we can carry on, just like Tim was saying earlier. And I think that I really caught that this time, and it has sparked something in me as well. So we'll carry this on. You know, if you got to piss some people off, man, you gotta do it.
Well, Scott, we know you're not afraid of pissing people off.
You said it nicely,
you're definitely willing to do it for the right reasons. And lastly, Homer, you usually start us off, but today you are our anchor. Hope you're doing well. Have you seen it recently?
Watched it earlier today. I don't know if I want to be an anchor. It's like I'm pulling everyone down below the water with me.
You're keeping it steady.
So I think a lot has been said, and I agree with pretty much everything as far as the power of this episode and the timeliness of it. I've got a couple things. So it's hard to watch some episodes because you don't want your characters that you love, that you care for, to be hurt, to see them suffer. And that's one of the things that I didn't exactly dread watching it, but I knew what was going to happen to Benny / Sisko. But the way it's done, like I'm zipping along watching, I'm looking at the time like, whoa, only 12 minutes left. So it wasn't like I had to stop and pause, but I want to actually ask Ira a question. I don't know if this would be something that you were involved with so much, or if it might be more like, say, Doug Drexler, but just the incredible detail in every room, every shot, the diner, the office. I mean, behind me, we've got a moodometer. I'm curious about whose idea that was. I did see that it changed and the mood got better later on in the show. And Sisko's apartment, everything from the music to, I mean, there's a tea kettle here too. It was just amazing. And you really feel like you are in 1953.
A lot of that has to do with Avery. Avery was super pumped. It's a weird expression to use with Avery Brooks, but Avery was engrossed in this episode, and he was meticulous in every aspect of it. I know that apartment, everything that was on camera, you know, he had either he requested it, you know, or he brought it himself, whatever, the books, the whole thing. And you know, a show like Trek where you have a lot of obviously very talented people in a lot of different categories, you know, the same grind that happens to the writing staff happens with production crews as well, and heads of departments. You know, you're grinding it out. You're grinding out the season. You're doing the best job you can all the time, but you know, it's like nose to the grindstone. And every now and then you get a show that's whatever, bigger or different. And suddenly it's like, hey, I can like really stretch on this one. I can really bring a different game to it. And I think this is one of those episodes. I mean, they had no choice because otherwise they would have had to deal with Avery, and no one wants to deal with Avery. But I think also professional pride. So what you're seeing is everyone attempting at least to be at their very best and putting in the extra effort.
It came through. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's a great way to end this. feel like we could talk about this for another few hours, but sadly we can't. Tim, you muted yourself again. That was a really good laugh right there. We love your laugh.
Really-
It's a crime to mute it. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Right.
No, just a couple final comments. One, I want to, I didn't get a chance to say before that Renee's performance was really amazing in this. I think you guys, you mentioned earlier about him not looking, Lawrence, was that you that mentioned him not looking Sisko in the eye?
Yeah.
And I noticed that too in his performance when he was like, well, and there's another thing I have to tell you, and he kind of was rolling his eyes like, let me find the way and the words to tell you, basically, you're fired essentially. But I thought his performance was great, and you need that contrast in order for Sisko, for Benny Russell's performance to also be great, because you need to have, feel him being the victim of this kind of prejudice. But I wanted to give Renee his dues for the performance that he gave. And the other thing I wanted to say was something, you mentioned watching the show and picking up new things that you didn't see before or hear before. And one of the things I picked up when I watched this episode was the line where Cassidy says, he's like, well, it's, it's just a matter of time now. And she says, well, it's been 15 years, especially if you count all the time, all the stories that you wrote in the Navy. And so it just made me realize that this Benny Russell character was somebody who served in the Navy and was like, a veteran essentially. And it was just one thing that I just didn't notice before. But I like the fact that you're giving this guy that kind of a background. He's not only a writer, but he's also a veteran, and this is the country that he fought for, and now is treating him like this. So I thought that was another extra little bonus.
That actually resonated with me because when this episode came out, I was in the Navy, but it didn't resonate with me then. It resonated with me now as someone who is an artist, thinking back on my career and thinking about time, not including the 5 years I spent in the Navy. That's like, wow. And that wouldn't have resonated then, but it resonates now. And it's multiple levels, there's onion levels of deepness.
But if he's World War II in the Navy, he was a cook.
Yeah.
Or he was a Dieckmann seaman. So they were not allowed to have any rank.
Yeah.
And
in the Korean War, let's not forget that they fought in segregated units.
Until Truman in the middle of the
50s,
Korean War desegregated it, which caused so much controversy. And I'm like, never mind.
Well, we can talk about this a bit more once we are done recording here, because obviously there's way more to talk about here. But thank you all so much for joining us and for sharing your thoughts. This was really awesome. A super huge special thanks to Ira Stephen Behr for joining us and for donating so much of his time today, and for also writing an amazing script.
Yes.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time. Until then, always remember the 7th rule.